Let's do a quick little experiment. Nothing fancy. For the sake of it, let's all imagine that Miko has won. That's it, she's the bride. I guarantee you that if you would go back and read the manga again, or just scan your memory, you're going to find an incredible amount of hints and foreshadowing in Miko's favor. You're going to say to yourself, how did I miss this? Or I should have known. I mean, heck, Miko was raised to be a bride, wasn't she? She was raised to be the perfect partner for Futaro, so it was only natural she took the win. I have a friend who I've been discussing the manga for a while now. It became a weekly routine at this point. He's a member of the church, a faithful believer strongly supporting Miko, and throughout our conversations he brought up a number of hints or possible hints, they were possible at that time. Anyway, so he presented some fascinating arguments as to why Miko is the bride. He even wrote entire essays substantiating his point. And to be honest, while I never truly believed Miko was the one, I couldn't disagree with him because everything he said made sense. I remember that at some point I said to myself, he's right, Miko has got to be the bride. My mind began to put every piece together and suddenly, from impossible, Miko became a quite likely candidate. The reason I mention this is to show you that every queen, maybe with the exception of Ichika, had a large number of possible hints. Some of them were maybe random things that weren't supposed to mean anything, but they could still be seen as hints. Someone could make a strong case for each queen, and a lot of people have made. Each one of them could have been the bride, based on the possible hints and foreshadowing, but also based on the narrative. Don't take my word for it, just stop for a second and think about it yourself. When I first started to analyze and research the manga for the first theory, I noticed that all of them had possible hints, not just a couple, but a lot. Arguably, Nino had the rawest out of the 5, the most in your face, which is why I made a separate case for her on 2 occasions. I tried to sort them by how strong and significant they were, but it didn't quite work since each queen had at least one major hint. Then I tried a different approach, to leave the hints in the background and sort of treat them as a secondary priority and mainly focus on the narrative. Where is the story heading? What's the ending for each character? What's their purpose, their relationship, their romantic progression, and so on. This combination was mainly what made me come to the conclusion that Itsuki was going to be the bride. Long story short, theoretically, each queen could have been the bride and have foreshadowing, hints, and the narrative to support them. But even though I knew that, and I was and still am okay with anyone winning, something felt really off after I read these latest 2 chapters. I couldn't exactly put my finger on what was it, and while I had an idea, I couldn't get a specific reason that would explain it. And trust me when I say it has nothing to do with Yotsuba herself, and not even with the disappointment I have at how Itsuki's character was handled, although I'll talk about Itsuki a bit later. Just for the record, Schrödinger's Yotsuba is the bride, she deserves it, congratulations. This isn't about who has the better choice, the most optimal choice, the most meritorious, the most deserving and such, none of that. Now before I go into the nitty gritty, I want to mention an important aspect that I believe contributes to this weird sensation that makes it feel off. The lack of romantic tension between Yotsuba and Futaro. While I always thought that everything would boil down to Futaro confessing first, therefore the queens who already confessed had a slim chance in my eyes, the romantic tension involved in each relationship always threw me off the trail, which is why I believed so much that Ichika could fit a possible twist when most people thought she's irredeemable. Ichika and Futaro have the best romantic tension out of the other relationships. It's very visible and it always goes back and forth between them, swapping the control every now and then. It's also what makes their chemistry so interesting. Miku and Nino have it more one-sidedly, but with some suggestive moments here and there. Itsuki herself has some strong moments and keeps a constant romantic tension in her interactions with Futaro, but Yotsuba doesn't have any. There's no romantic tension involved in her interactions with Futaro. You may be saying that Neji couldn't show any of that, but he did it with the other queens, so we would have not given anything away. Quite frankly, it would have built a solid foundation for his decision. If Futaro had romantic tension with each one of them, no one would complain about the lack of it in Yotsuba's case. You may be saying Yotsuba and Futaro didn't need to have any romantic tension, and please keep this idea in mind because I will really break it down a bit later in the video. That being said, let's get into the nitty gritty. And I believe the first issue is in regards to Yotsuba's development. What I'm going to say now might be bold, so I'm asking you to think about it before reacting. Yotsuba's development isn't really there. I thought about this before saying it out loud to avoid sounding like an idiot, but is there any difference between chapter 1 Yotsuba and chapter 107 Yotsuba? There isn't, right? The main part of her story was told through the use of flashbacks. But flashbacks aren't character development. They don't represent a progression. They don't move the story forward. They only add additional understanding to the characters that can help explain why the character is acting or reacting the way it does in the present. It's true that Yotsuba supported Futaro from the very beginning and kept doing it throughout the manga. During the field trip, the test of courage, then when they became class reps, Yotsuba was always supporting Futaro from the background. Undeniably, she is the sole reason Futaro convinced the queens to study. If it wasn't for her, he would have most likely quit tutoring them. She's also the sole reason Futaro became a class rep and managed to get some friends. The impact she had on Futaro is incredibly huge, and it's entirely believable that Futaro appreciated the subtle support of Yotsuba and eventually fell in love with that. But helping Futaro has nothing to do with any development. Now I know a lot of people will raise the question, well, does Yotsuba need development? And fair enough, let me break this down so it's easier to understand. If Yotsuba doesn't need development, we can safely conclude that she is already developed, right? Since she doesn't need development, therefore doesn't need growth and change, she is already developed. But this idea isn't true. All of the queens have two major character problems that they need to deal with. Very briefly, Ichika struggles with her facade as the big sister and can honestly pursue Futaro because Miku also loves him. Nino doesn't want to accept change and has a daddy issue. Miku struggles with her confidence and low self-esteem and wants to become the perfect partner for Futaro. Yotsuba cannot overcome the failed promise and feels indebted to her sisters. Itsuki cannot overcome her mother's advice and struggles with her wish to become a teacher. They all have problems that require growth and change to overcome them. Now all of them, except Yotsuba, had to face their problems throughout the story. They didn't conclude their problems midway through the manga, but they moved forward and achieved another stage. Yotsuba, on the other hand, overcame her failed promise issue in a single chapter. All she needed was Futaro telling her the present is more important. She didn't even have enough time to fully accept it before Futaro chose her. It all happened in a single day, then the next day Futaro chose her. At this point in the manga, what's left for the queens is a resolution, and their journeys are complete. Yotsuba's other issue, her debt to her sisters, will most likely be dealt with during the resolution. So her character's issues have been tackled and overcame in the last 5% of the story. Now the same people or others will say, Yotsuba changed Futaro the most. She's been supportive of him from the very beginning, that's why he picked her. And I want to talk a bit about this supportiveness of hers. I made the claim that Yotsuba has won because she's Lolicano, and a lot of people have been quick to reply saying that I'm wrong, that Yotsuba supported Futaro from the very beginning as opposed to her sisters, and he fell in love with that. And fair enough. But let me ask you this. Why did she support Futaro from the very beginning? What's the reason she did that? Isn't it because she recognized Futaro right away and was also in love with him since they were kids? Sure it is. Her sisters had to be more cautious around a stranger. They had to start from zero, knowing nothing about Futaro or how to approach him. Do you see what I mean? The only reason Yotsuba won, which Futaro himself stated, is because she always supported him. But she always supported Futaro because she already knew him and she was already in love with him before and when the main story began. So of course she would be friendly with him while her sisters rejected a stranger. Lolicano, Yotsuba, was the reason Futaro changed from a delinquent to a top student, and she is also the only one that could 100% support him from the start simply because she knew him and loved him beforehand. So if these two or one of them is the reason Yotsuba has won, which it is, can you not see why she won before the main story even began? Let's recap. Yotsuba and Futaro's relationship lacks any romantic tension. Yotsuba barely has any development over the course of the story, be it personal or romantic. She supported Futaro from the beginning because she knew him and loved him beforehand. The moment her issues are solved, she gets chosen. So, am I wrong for saying Futaro's choice feels off? Now let's set Yotsuba aside for a moment because I want to talk a bit about a fundamental dilemma in Neji's writing, specifically during and after the Sisters' War arc. For a better understanding, I need to give you guys some background information. Usually, writers have a rough outline of how they want their story to unfold. Some writers like to make more detailed outlines and others more unrestricted, letting the characters decide the next thing. But mystery stories usually require precise and compact plot outlines. The solution and its foreshadowing are the most important part, so there must be a certain trail of hints to support that. If we refer back to the Rena Lolicano incident that revolved around Yotsuba and Itsuki, we can clearly see that Neji planned everything from the very beginning. The early chapters are bombarded with hints and foreshadowing that by the time chapter 42, Rena's introduction, comes out, we have everything we need to solve the case. Of course, we would need to go back and analyze thoroughly, but the point is that we have all that we need to find her identity. However, this takes a weird turn when it comes to the bride's identity because romance is involved on top of the mystery. One of my favorite mystery writers, Nisio Isin, said that he intentionally writes without deciding what will happen later. That's how he manages to balance and blend the mystery with the other aspects. And here's what I found fascinating about his writing. He does have a plan and a resolution in his mind whilst developing the story, but it's never truly set in stone because there's always a part of him that writes wanting to see the ending for himself. Where would be the satisfaction if he knew how everything would end? If he has an ending planned, but midway through the story the characters take over and deviate from the initial plan, then he follows those characters instead of forcing them to follow the plot, and they will deliver their own fitting ending. For example, his protagonist from Monogatari, Araragi Koyomi, was initially meant to fall in love with a character named Hanekawa. He arguably did, and the readers were expecting the progression of their relationship. Araragi himself said that he loves Hanekawa, and so did Hanekawa herself. There was a lot of romantic tension and chemistry between them. But at some point during the story, he gets with another girl who eventually becomes his official lover. It wasn't an unexpected turn of events, no one complained about his choice because it made sense and it was entirely natural. The readers figured out, earlier or at the same time as Araragi did, that he fell in love with the desire to have Hanekawa, and Hanekawa, initially, with the desire to have Araragi. One love developed further, but the other didn't, and so the other love chose another. This whole thing was already subtly hinted at throughout various scenes, it didn't happen out of nowhere. Nisio tends to introduce the foreshadowing early, and always leaves at least two possible explanations for each of them before he links it to the next one. That way one foreshadowing alone won't be enough to figure out anything. Anyway, foreshadowing aside, multiple girls fell for Araragi, but to keep this spoiler free, if it doesn't make sense for one girl to still be in love with Araragi or to pursue him anymore, then she's out of that particular plotline. She won't linger around just for the sake of it, even if Nisio himself didn't plan for that to happen. The core thing of all this is that if the characters and story develop in a different way than initially planned, a way that wouldn't exactly fit the first ending, which might happen when the story is longer than expected or has a certain length, then Nisio follows the new direction. And now coming back to the Queen's and the Bride's identity, I believe the first issue here is that the characters act in two totally different ways. One that is required by the plot, and one the characters develop themselves. And so they intertwine. The connection between mystery and romance is severed. Take Ichika for example. The plot requires her to stay a choice until the end, but her character has already moved past Futaro a while ago. In the Sisters' War arc, when she said goodbye, she said goodbye. There was no reason to bring her back in the race, literally no reason. She had her acting career to focus on and it was natural for her to move on with her life. But she's brought back because the plot requires her to be a choice. In chapter 94 and 95, Futaro goes out of his way to bring her back while giving her false suggestions. Even though it was incredibly clear that she won't be picked, By chapter 102 we get a blatant confirmation, especially with the drink choice. The only possible way for her to win was a twist, a very random one, but she's still there, acting as a choice. Her character developed and made peace with the idea that Futaro won't be hers, but the plot requires her to be a choice. Do you see what I mean? And you can do this with the other queens, it's the same thing. In Itsuki's case, it's the worst. Honestly, she has been a simple plot device that spilled fallacies, and that disappoints me the most. In a series with the premise of the bride being any one of the quintuplets, she was very clearly left out. I always supported the idea that Neji was trying to show that a slow burn romance was not inferior to those huge exciting portrayals of love. If she won, it would have been a validation of all those little moments and how they could have built the foundation for a strong relationship. Why have all those moments throughout the manga building her eventual romantic relationship? And I'll stop my rant here since I don't want to complain the entire video. Neji definitely wanted to maintain the mystery aspect at all costs. Hiding a mystery from the audience until the big reveal is how you write a mystery, but not a romance. And this is the problem. Blatantly prioritizing the mystery at the expense of the characters and the romance aspect won't translate into a satisfying ending when the ending is mainly about the romance of those characters. At the end of the day, it was still a fantastic ride. I won't hide the fact that I'm quite disappointed at how it ended. Again, don't get the wrong idea, it isn't because Yotsuba has won, it's because how the other aspects and characters were handled. But I enjoyed the journey nonetheless, and that's the most important thing. And thank you again for watching.